Ladies and gentlemen, if you've ever strapped a lawn chair to a skateboard and yelled, "Let's ride!" congratulations, you're already 80% of the way to understanding today's mechanical marvel. We're talking about the 1903 Orient Buckboard, the vehicular equivalent of a broomstick with an engine and enough charm to sell moonshine in a dry county. And yet, despite looking like a picnic bench on bicycle wheels, the buckboard rolled its way into automotive history with the finesse of a goat on roller skates and the determination of a tax accountant chasing a mileage deduction. Of course, none of this madness would be possible without the fine people who support our channel. You legends keep the fuel in our tanks and the spark in our plugs. Thanks to our sponsor tier members, I haven't had to sell my neighbor's Wi-Fi password or busk with a kazoo at the flea market. You're the real MVPs. May your radiators run cool and your parking spaces always be shady. Now let's wind the crank back to the dawn of American motoring. It was 1903, and over in Waltham, Massachusetts, the Waltham Manufacturing Company was already shifting from bicycles to automobiles, much like my uncle who tried to pivot from stocks to cryptocurrency, with similar levels of optimism. Led by bicycle-bred engineer Leonard B. Gaylor, they launched the Orient Buckboard under the cheeky banner, "The cheapest automobile in the world, everybody should have one." Talk about confidence. The buckboard wasn't built to wow, it was built to move. Farmers, rural mail carriers, and anyone brave enough to sit on a plank with a throttle were the target audience. Charles Metz had just left the company, leaving Gaylor to strip everything down to the basics. No fenders, no doors, no roof, just planks, wheels, and ambition. The name buckboard came from the old horse-drawn cart style, and boy did this thing embrace its wooden ancestry. It debuted with a chassis so rustic it looked like someone had just finished replacing fence panels and decided to drive them instead. From 1903 to 1907, Waltham built roughly 2,500 of these marvels, and somehow about 57 examples have survived, proving that even the most basic engineering can outlast several marriages, a few presidents, and at least one doomsday cult. In fact, one of the earliest examples, chassis number 100, ended up in the Henry Ford collection before being sold by the Merrick Auto Museum. If that isn't a glow-up, I don't know what is. Technically speaking, the Orient Buckboard was a masterpiece of minimalist engineering. Beneath its plank seat lay a single-cylinder, air-cooled engine churning out a mighty 4 horsepower. The early engines were 578 cc, using a 3 1/4 inches by 4 1/4 inches bore and stroke. Mounted at the rear near the axle, this engine was cooled by nothing more than airflow and determination, aided by an exposed fan. Ignition came from a 4-cell battery and a timer, with fuel stored in a modest 3 1/2 gallons tank behind the seat. Now, here's where it gets spicy. The buckboard used a friction drive transmission. Instead of gears, it had a flat metal disc on the engine shaft pressed against a fiber-faced wheel. Want to change speeds? Just move the wheel along the disc's face. Want to go backward? Slide it to the other side. Voila! Instant reverse. It was as smooth as a door-to-door salesman at a widow's house. The setup connected to a countershaft, which then used 2 chains to power the rear wheels. Power flow was as follows: engine to disc, disc to wheel, wheel to countershaft, countershaft to chains, chains to wheels, and then, eventually, to the ground. The original buckboards used tiller steering because nothing says precision control like a stick and guesswork. Later models upgraded to a steering wheel, presumably after too many users drove into ponds while trying to mail a letter. As for brakes, if you sneezed hard enough, you could probably stop faster. Braking was by cable-operated band transmission brakes, often acting on the countershaft or rear wheels. But stopping wasn't the buckboard's strong suit. It was more of a "we'll get there eventually or not" type of situation. Suspension was where the buckboard really leaned into its identity. Literally. The original chassis was a pair of ash planks that flexed to absorb bumps. Think of it as a springy diving board with a vengeance. By 1906, they added quarter or full elliptic leaf springs to the rear to improve ride quality, or at least to ensure passengers didn't lose dental fillings on cobblestones. Period specifications list 26 inches, wire spoke wheels on 2.5 inches, Goodrich single-tube tires. The wheel track was a slim 42 inches, though some versions were widened to 56 inches to match wagon ruts. Its wheelbase measured about 80 inches, with a total length around 9 to 10 feet and width of just under 3.5 feet. Weight? A mere 500 to 525 pounds, which is less than the combined ego of 2 car influencers. Performance-wise, the buckboard topped out at around 30 to 35 miles per hour, which was impressive until you realized a stiff breeze could change your route. Yet it had astonishing fuel economy for the time. Reports claimed up to 30 miles per gallon or 121 miles on just 4 gallons. And thanks to that friction drive, it could climb 32% grades and even a 35-step stone stace, proving that sometimes dumb determination beats complex design. Design-wise, the Orient Buckboard was less of a car and more of a concept. There was no hood, no windshield, and no bodywork beyond a ducktail-style rear deck in later models. The entire interior was a single bench seat on wood, with the fuel tank lounging behind your kidneys. Luxury? The closest you got was a coil spring under the seat that may or may not have worked, depending on whether it had recently rained. But this stripped-down aesthetic wasn't an accident. Gaylor and the Waltham team knew exactly what they were doing. While Detroit was building expensive machines for the city elite, Waltham aimed squarely at the rural working class, folks who were still suspicious of the combustion engine and didn't want to pay extra for footboards. By eliminating complexity, they kept the buckboard cheap, light, and just reliable enough to cross a cow field without losing a wheel or a passenger. Its advertising campaigns were equally memorable. "Everybody should have one," they said. And for once, a car slogan wasn't lying. The buckboard was cheap enough for the common man and odd enough to make it look like you'd built it yourself. One advertisement even called it especially adapted for mail service, which, considering the state of rural roads in 1903, meant it could survive both potholes and possums. Eventually, however, time caught up with the buckboard. Waltham ended production in 1907, and Charles Metz absorbed its tooling into his own operations. By then, the Model T was just a year away, and America was shifting toward cars with, bodies. But the buckboard remained a relic of that beautifully naive moment in automotive history, when engineers believed that 4 wheels and a dream were all you needed. As for value, the buckboard started at around $500, new in 1903. By 1904, it dropped to $375, and in 1906 crept up to $440. In today's money, that's roughly $12,000 to $16,000. Compare that to modern economy cars that can't even climb stairs or run on planks. The most expensive known sale was $30,250 at a 2010 RM Sotheby's auction, with other restored examples selling for $20,000 to $30,000. A more rustic buckboard sold for $7,700 back in 2017, which is roughly the cost of 4 used scooters and a week's worth of regret. And yet, despite its lack of frills, the Orient Buckboard deserves a standing ovation. It was the Dollar Tree of motoring, basic, blunt, and utterly brilliant in its own stubborn way. It reminded the world that not every car needed to be polished brass and velvet trim. Sometimes all you need is a plank, a piston, and a little bit of courage. And hey, if you enjoyed this wild ride through wooden-wheeled madness, hit that subscribe button faster than the buckboard hits 30 miles per hour. May your spark plugs never foul, your fenders never wobble, and your automotive dreams be just weird enough to keep the neighbors suspicious.